Okay, so at the end of the last video, we enabled the character so that when you hit the space bar, she appears in front of the monster, goes into a new attack animation, and then exits the animation. But she's still here. So the reason why I didn't want to address how to do that in the previous video is it really, even though it seems like it's part of the same functionality, the way we make it happen is somewhat different. So let's take a look. So we need her to reappear back here at those coordinates. So let's go to the script that's on her. So this is the SuitCon script. Now, by default, as I said, there's a start and there's an update section. You can actually add your own sections to this. The difference is these will automatically run. The ones you create, depending on what they are, may or may not. Like there's ones such as on trigger enter, on mouse down, things like that will also automatically run. But if you create one from scratch, it will only run if you call it. So let's take a look at how that works. So this is the update section. So we want to do it outside of update. And we're just going to name it whatever we want. Void. Let's call this return suit. And we'll just do return suit. Same convention, you have the parentheses after it and the squiggly brackets. So what do we want this to do? We want to do this. So same type of functionality. We want her to return, but to these coordinates. So we'll make this negative 6.77 and negative 2.46. And we'll save this. Now, like I said, that won't run because it's not an automatically executed routine. You have to call it. Well, how do we call it? So let's take a look at how that works. So what we want to do is with suit highlighted, we really want to go back into the animation. See this little icon up here? It says add event. So what you do is you can also right click up here, I believe, and do add event. So this is the end of, let's see, this is idle, so we don't want idle. We want to go to attack suit. And at the end of the attack, we want to add an event. And this says, okay, well, what function do you want? You click on the drop-down box, and look what's there, return suit. We now have something that we can call. So we now choose that. And what happens is we're in the attack suit animation. The attack animation plays, and when it gets to the last frame, it says, by the way, run that function, which is right here. And it now says, bring her back. That should do it. And there we go. And just like that, it brings her back. So now you've seen how to give a player an attack animation. So it's kind of just rinse and repeat now. We'll go through the full process for her because she'll be slightly different. What I think we'll do with her is she'll appear here, but she's going to shoot out a projectile. We'll use like a particle system, I think, like make a fireball. So again, we're going to create a temporary placeholder button press to call her because we don't want to get really into the battle flow yet. We need the individual pieces in place. We need the individual characters to have attacks. We need the monster to have an attack, and then we can create the flow between those actions. So again, if you want to see a different key control, don't worry, we'll get into that. This is just going to be for the moment. So for her, we'll just make it So we use space. Let's try this. Let's just change this to the number 1. There you go. And just like that, we're able to change it. That's what I'm saying. Don't get too worried about the actual keyboard input that we're selecting. It's that easy to change it. So why did I change it to the number 1? Again, even in the testing phase, we want something consistent. So now what we're going to do is we're going to have it be check for number 2. So copy. What we're going to do is we open a new script, because like I said, we're going to have 1 for each. So write create C# WitchCon. Click on the witch, drag and drop the script, open that up. And now we're just going to paste that into the update section. So we paste that in. And then what we do is we change this to the number 2, since the number 1 is already working for the other character. We get rid of the set trigger because she's not going to have a different animation. And we don't need her to be that far to the right. She's not going to be right in front of the monster. She's going to be more toward the formation to the left. So let's make this like a -3.8. Save this and see how that looks. Number 2. All right, that looks about right. So she's moved in line with the enemy, and then what she's going to do is she's going to shoot out a fireball. You got a couple ways to do this. We've been using 2D animation up to this point, so you could create an animated fireball, or if you want, you can combine particle effects, which is actually very common, that you, even with these kind of retro 2D games, you still see them use the particle effects. So let's go through a particle system really quickly. I have other tutorials that break it down more detailed, but we'll go through the basics. So game object, particle system, and don't get overwhelmed by all the different parts of the particle system. So let's change the shape. I'm going to turn it to a circle. We're going to rotate it towards the screen. As I mentioned before, order and layer. Come down to the renderer and you can see that particle systems do have an order. Let's put this actually on number 4 because I think I want this to be on top of even the enemies, and also if we have other particle systems like a heal particle system, you're going to want that really on top of the player. So to try to be consistent, let's put this order in layer 4. Now, see how there's like a circle around this? You can grab one of these control points and shrink the center. You can also change it back up in shape by changing the radius. Watch how the radius decreases. See? So I'm shrinking this. Alright, so now let's move this over to the left so the camera image isn't blocking it. Those particles are way too big. So let's have the start size be more like 0.3. Start lifetime, let's have it be just like, say, 0.8. And a lot of this is really guesswork. It's like sculpting. You keep working until it looks the way that you want it to work. So as far as start speed, let's make this really slow. Let's make this like 0.2 because we really don't want the particles flying out. We really want them kind of just be left behind if this is going to be like a fireball. And we need more particles. So here's a mission. So you can see it's a very low number. It's only 10. So let's bump that up to like 125. Again, it's nothing magical. You're just kind of going with the flow. So let's move this up to her. So that's looking okay. Now there's two places for color. There's start color and there's color over lifetime. Well, there's also color by speed, but I never use that. So start color and color over lifetime. What these do is they take that default particle and they change the shade. They change the color. So let's do color over lifetime. Click on that. The top is the transparency, the bottom is the color. So if you click here, then you click on color here, you can choose red. Likewise, you want to come over here, click here, and again select red. So it's red over the lifetime. Now there's a few things you can do with this. If you want the particles to become transparent as they're left behind, what you can do is you can click up here and then you change the alpha. Watch what happens as we do this. So see how it becomes more wispy? It's kind of hard to see with the with all the indicators on top of it. So we'll do that for now. And just so you know, you can add other key points in here. So say you don't want it to become transparent too quick, you can do like that. And then set this up to back to 255 so it does not become transparent at all at this time, and then it starts to become transparent. So you can add keyframes like that. Also, we want the size of the particle to get smaller over time. So size over lifetime. Click on the graph here. And now what you can do is you can click on the dot at the end and you bring this down. So now, in addition to becoming transparent, the particles also become smaller. So it creates a much more smooth transition. Rather than just seeing a particle disappear, it makes it look a little bit more nebulous. Now, one more thing that we want to do is let's do simulation space. Okay, so when I move this, watch what happens. The whole thing moves. Watch what happens when I change this from local for simulation space to world. Particles get left behind. So it's not a great high-end effect, but I think we'll leave it like that. We'll add a few more particles. And make the start speed even slower, because now it's not so much that the particles are shooting backwards so much as that they're being left behind. Okay, so why did we do this? It's because we want to be able to instantiate this, or spawn is the term you might be more familiar with. You're spawning a bullet, you're spawning a spell attack. So to do that, let's first rename this. Let's call this Fireball. Now, one of the benefits to using a particle system is you can attach a script to it and you can actually modify these settings. Why would you want to do that? Well, say your fireball has 6 different levels. You have 6 different, power levels to the fireball. Okay. Rather than making 6 different fireball particle systems, you make one, and then you simply change which one gets instantiated based on the script. So that's one thing you can do. You can recreate it from scratch. It's not a big deal, but it kind of simplifies things like that. So let's now take that fireball. We're going to do one more thing. We're going to add a rigid body. The reason for that is it needs a rigid body to have momentum, to make it have velocity. So add component, physics, rigid body. We're going to get rid of gravity because we just want it to travel horizontally. And now we're going to take the fireball, drag and drop it here into the asset area, and we now have created a prefab. Delete the original, and we're very close to where we need to be. Go back to the which script, and now what's going to happen is variables don't just store values, they can also store objects. So let's do public transform, and we'll call this fireball obj. Again, with the naming convention, whenever I'm using a variable to represent an object, I try to drop obj at the end, because as your program gets bigger, and if you notice when you're typing out, it will suggest what the next word is that you're looking for. When you start having dozens and dozens of variables, you want to remember which one does what. So by doing that kind of naming convention and you see the obj, you're like, oh, okay, that's the object. Okay, really close. So we save this and watch what happens when we go back to the which. Right there, fireball object. So the variable, just drag and drop that prefab onto it. Now, for want of a better term, the which is now aware of the fireball. The which can now do things with that fireball prefab. Namely, she can instantiate it. She can spawn it. Okay? So, we said that if the button gets pressed down, okay, she should move her position. But we also want her to instantiate this fireball too. So instantiate. What is she going to instantiate? She's going to instantiate the fireball obj. And that's what I was talking about. You only saw one name in that list. But when you start getting dozens and dozens of variables, you're going to see them all. Where do we want it to be instantiated? Well, it's going to be very similar to this location. Not quite, but close. So there are 3 arguments for instantiate. What is being instantiated, where it's being instantiated, and the rotation of the object being instantiated. So you can either use a single variable, or you can break this down into 3 when it comes for the position. So for the second argument, it can either be a single variable, or it can be all 3. You can actually, or in this case 2, it's a vector 2, sorry, you can use both values. So let's make this, needs to be a little bit closer, so like make it negative 3.5 F. Vertical, it's going to be slightly higher because her arm is slightly above, so negative 0.22 F. And again, nothing magical about this, it's just a little bit of trial and error. And then the rotation, fireball dot rotation. Okay, so when the number 2 is pressed, she gets moved. That was already working, but now a fireball will get instantiated. And if I didn't make any mistakes, that should do it. Okay, so the fireball did indeed get instantiated, although not really in the right place. So it needs to be even more to the right, and it needs to be even higher. Closer. So just slightly higher and just slightly more forward. So slightly more forward, so like 2.9, and now we'll go positive like 0.1 F. There we go, so almost right. We'll make one more tweak and then move on to the next spot. So we'll make it 2.7. So like I said, nothing magical about the numbers, just trial and error till you get it right. Now, she's having a glow in her hand, which you might want because maybe it's like levitation or something. But in this case, we said we want that spell to shoot out. So one last thing. Sorry about that. I clicked where I didn't mean to. This prefab can be modified even though it's a prefab, even though it's down here. Okay, so it's going to get its own script. So right click, create, C#, and we'll call this Fireball Con. No, you don't have to end everything with the word con. Lots of things may not, I mean, almost any script, I guess, could be seen as a control script. But again, it helps you differentiate between, okay, it's the Fireball object versus the Fireball script. So rather than using the same word over again, you're differentiating it. So just drag and drop that script onto the prefab, open it up. And as we said, we added a rigid body. So the start section, so this is when it gets instantiated, we want something to happen. We want get component, and it's the rigid body that we said we want to change, and we're going to give it velocity. And that's also, in this case, a vector 2. And we want it to move left to right. So we want to move in a positive direction. So let's give it a velocity of like 4, and we're not having it move vertically, so that will be a 0. Now it should shoot out. It's not going to stop, it's going to shoot and keep going, but that's the next step. There we go. Again, it's not a high-end effect, it's not meant to be. Now, I mentioned at the end of the last video that I would have a character move forward and then return based on a timer. We didn't use a timer on her per se, we used a trigger. She doesn't have an animation sequence. Now, you could, if you want to, you could do both. You could have an animation sequence of her shooting the fireball and the fireball coming out, okay? But we're not doing that. So how do we make her return? As I mentioned, we're going to use a timer. So, in this case, outside of start, outside of update, oops, sorry, don't want to do this inside of Fireball Con, we want to do inside of the Witch Con script. So outside of start, outside of update, it is enumerator. And you give it a name, and we'll keep it similar. Return witch, just as there was return suit, this will be return witch. So what's IEnumerator? IEnumerator is used for creating delays and then performing a task after the delay. So yield return new. Don't worry too much about what that means. You have to enter it, but this is really what you care about. Wait 4 seconds. And then you put a number here measured in seconds. It can be a decimal. We'll do 1 second. So a second will be waited, and then something will happen. Well, we're going to have her return back to her normal location. And let's just check what that is. So let's go to witch. And that's it up there. So it is negative 6.69 and 2.3. Okay, so she's been returned to her location. Now, this, similar to other coroutines that you've made, does not automatically function. You have to call this. In this case, you're going to do it in here because you're saying, okay, move her when you press the number 2, then wait a second and bring her back. So how do we do that? Start coroutine, parenthesis, the name of the coroutine you created, return witch, another set of parentheses, and now we're just about done. Let's save that. hit the number 2, she fires, and then she returns. Okay, I think that's just about it for this one. Yes, the spell isn't stopped, but that gets into a whole new type of functionality, so I don't want to dive into that in this video. Also, if you want to pause and tweak that spell attack, because it is very basic, but now that you've had an introduction to particle systems, you can kind of take that offline, mess around with the particle system till you're happy with it, and then you can come back for the next lesson if you so choose. So that should about do it for this one.